In recent years, the digital video monopoly YouTube, which is part of the digital search monopoly Google, has been accused of trying to silence conservative viewpoints. PragerU and other innocuous center-right content providers have found themselves censored on YouTube. YouTube denies doing any of this on purpose. It was accidental, they say. We have no political agenda. Well, it turns out that's a lie. This show has exclusively obtained an internal YouTube memo from April of 2017, last year, that lays out in detail how YouTube censors videos. One of the reasons the extent of YouTube censorship isn't obvious to most people is because the company is smart enough not to scrub every video it wants to censor. Instead, many videos wind up in what the memo describes as limited state. Sounds like something out of Scientology. Videos in limited state are intentionally pushed down on the site, so they're harder to find. They're also demonetized, meaning the people who post them can't make money from them, no matter how often they're viewed. Think that isn't a big deal? What would happen if you couldn't find the New York Times on a newsstand? What would happen if its publishers weren't allowed to make money from selling it? Would that qualify as censorship? Obviously, of course it would. So what are the criteria for censoring videos on YouTube? Well, according to the memo, quote, controversial religious or supremacist content qualifies. So does, quote, highly controversial inflammatory content. What exactly does any of that mean? None of it is defined. It's totally subjective. YouTube makes the call and does so with maximum political intent. For example, YouTube decided it was inflammatory for PragerU to question the notion that all cops are racist. If you don't think they are, you're in trouble, according to YouTube. So PragerU's video was demonetized and effectively declared hate speech. Yet videos that suggest that, I don't know, white people are inherently evil remain on YouTube without any restrictions. That's clearly political. The memo makes it very clear where YouTube censors are coming from. It explains that the company is committed to, quote, the freedom to belong, including the resulting benefits of diversity and inclusion. Okay, sounds good. But what exactly does that mean? Again, it's entirely subjective, and intentionally so. At one point, the memo declares that any, quote, demeaning language against a protected group may result in a video being removed from the site. So who are these protected groups? Well, according to YouTube, refugees are a protected group. So let's say you don't like the fact that refugees are being resettled in your neighborhood, for example. You've assumed it was your right as a citizen to disagree with government policy. Nope. Not according to YouTube. They will censor your complaints about what your government is doing and call you a bigot in the process if you don't like refugee resettlement policy, for example. Well, it's not surprising that one of the trusted flaggers YouTube has deputized to censor extremist content is the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is itself, irony of ironies, an extremist group. The SPLC has a long history of inciting hatred and division for political ends. It was the SPLC that slandered the Family Research Council as, quote, a hate group and labeled the Pulse nightclub shooting a right-wing attack, which, as you know, it was not. The SPLC is totally discredited, and anyone who spends 5 minutes reading about it comes to that conclusion. And yet YouTube trusts the Southern Poverty Law Center to censor your videos, and that tells you a lot. We contacted YouTube for a statement on all of this, and we asked whether the company had revised its policies since the memo was written last year. The company barely responded. A flack linked us to a blog post written by a Google lawyer last June in which he vowed that the company would be more aggressive in censoring videos it doesn't like. It's worth noting that almost nobody in power is fighting back against this censorship. Here you have an American company incubated in America by Americans under the protection of American law and courts, which is now working to undermine the most sacred of American rights, which is the freedom of expression. Yet the Congress, which is run, by the way, by Republicans right now, is doing precisely nothing about this. When you ask them, they mumble something unintelligible about free markets and get back to designing another tax cut for companies like YouTube. Meanwhile, the rest of us who live here, the ones who still care about free speech, are left to fend for ourselves. The big digital monopolies demand that we conform to their worldview, and they shut us down when we dissent. They have too much power. They are a threat to this country. It is time to complain while we still can. But YouTube isn't the only politicized part of Google. In an internal memo written by Google, revealed by James Damore's lawsuit, managers are told to avoid rewarding people for following the dominant, quote, white male culture of America. Aspects of that culture, the memo said, included the meritocracy, belief in objectivity, and individual achievement. Ideas that nobody thought were race-specific until now. Harmeet Dillon is representing James Damore in this lawsuit. She joins us tonight. It's hard to believe this is even real. Tell us what the memo says.
Yeah, so the memo basically says it's part of a Google program for managers called Inclusive Perf, which is inclusive performance, and they are coached and sometimes forced to evaluate people on managers on the feedback they give to their employees. So this memo is about when you give feedback to your employees, be careful not to give too positive feedback to white people for stuff that is white, according to Google, such as merit-based performance and individual excellence and so forth. And then, you know, when you're giving feedback to people of color, you should be sensitive to the fact that they're more likely to be in favor of group achievement and collective values. There's some negative traits associated with whites, which is supposed to be that they talk about you instead of to you, you know, so they're backstabbing. There are these gross racial stereotypes on both sides that are deeply offensive. For example, to say that this stereotype that whites care about meritocracy and accomplishment is to imply that other races don't. I mean, so this is clearly absurd. And the most absurd thing is that James Damore purportedly, after the fact, was let go because of gender stereotypes. But Google perpetuates racial stereotypes every single day in its management. It's shocking.
But they don't, of course, hold their, I don't know, programming staff to these same standards. I mean, of course, they demand excellence when it comes to writing the code that is the basis of their business.
Right, of course they should.
Right, yeah, of course, as they should, by the way. I agree with that. So what's their response been? I mean, this seems horrifying, incredibly divisive, inherently bigoted, as you just pointed out. Are they conceding this is real?
No, I don't think they get it. I mean, Google is too big to fail, too powerful to be questioned, and so they've been getting away with this. And in fact, in the face of our lawsuit, they simply describe all criticism of their race baiting and racial gerrymandering as alt-right criticism. So all of us
why are look? You've been you know, you and I had the same job 25 years ago. You've been a conservative your whole life. You're on the Dartmouth Review 30 years ago. Why are conservatives, Republicans in Washington defending this crap, defending Google? Why aren't they doing something about this?
Well, I'm afraid one very crass reason is that Google spreads the money around both sides. So members of Congress and the Senate who have power to do something about antitrust issues, these gross employment violations, they don't care. It's hard to get their attention. And, you know, Google very carefully spreads the money around in the media as well, and in nonprofits as well. I mean, they're really ubiquitous and everywhere. And so as a result, people know which side their bread is buttered. And there are very few principled people who say, you know what, I don't want to take your money, Google. I'm going to criticize you, and I'm going to be objective about it. So that's what we're running up against here in this case. Now, there are a lot of patriots who are shocked by this. I mean, we've had the recent example just this week of Google trying to seal our lawsuit. In fact, they have sealed it for a 2-month period, believe it or not. They called up the court, and they said, you know, some of our employees are being harassed. We want to bring a motion to seal this entire lawsuit. And the court has sealed it for 2 months. So for 2 months now, the public is not going to be able to go to the Santa Clara County Superior Court and read that. But where's the outrage? Nobody seems to care.
Well, it's on this show. Thank you for all you're doing. Harmeet Dillon, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Time for final exam.